I think the best actors come from the theater and return to the theater. Even great film actors like Denzel Washington or Meryl Streep, you see them keep coming back to the theater. And to me, the theater in America is Broadway. I had to go back to the cast and say, guys, we're starting out again. I don't know what we're going to do. We got to figure this out. I have some ideas. It's not in my wheelhouse, but we're going to figure it out together. And we had to redo from scratch that play. And I brought in some choreographers and helped me get there. And we got a performance out of it. But man, I mean, just telling you about that, and I feel like I was kicked in the stomach, you know? And,
wow.
And it's reminding me, and that's, yeah, you learn by making mistakes, but man, that was a heavy one. Art heals the world because art reports the world back to the world, and people don't go to the theater to see you, they go to see themselves. And nothing is more affirming when you see a story and you go, I recognize myself in that story.
Welcome to the Theatre Art Life podcast. Today we're talking with Terry Knickerbocker. Terry Knickerbocker is the founder and studio director of the Terry Knickerbocker Studio, the renowned New York City-based acting school. He teaches the Meisner technique and is part of a direct lineage of Sanford Meisner, having spent over 30 years training and teaching with William Esper, one of Sandy's most respected protégés. Terry has coached such well-known actors as Austin Butler, Sacha Baron Cohen, Daniel Craig, Zac Efron, Boyd Holbrook, Natasha Lyonne, Sam Rockwell, Emmy Rossum, Jurnee Smollett, and Michelle Williams. Terry, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Anna. My mother would be pleased to hear that introduction.
Amazing. I would love to hear, before we get into your career, how was your journey into the arts and what drove you into this industry?
Well, pulled me, I would say. Well, I was really fortunate to have parents who gave me the gift of theater and music and museums and for whom art was important. They were both attorneys. My dad's passed, my mother's still very much alive. And we went to the theater all the time and listened to Gilbert and Sullivan and stuff and opera at home and went to museums and went to symphony. And so it was part of my blood to value art. And I'm very grateful to them. And also they sent me when I sought training, because I didn't think I was drawn to acting as a kid and acted a lot in middle school and high school. But when I went to college, I wasn't thinking about a career as an actor. And I was a French major. And I thought maybe I'd be a diplomat or something like that. I don't know quite. I didn't know what I was going to be. I didn't have what am I going to grow up to do? But I always wanted to act. And then I saw an audition notice at university and went and auditioned and ultimately dropped out of school because all I wanted to do was act. And acted for several years up in Boston. And then kind of got to the point where it's like, oh God, I was doing it based on instinct and sometimes it worked out. And sometimes a lot of the time I didn't know what I was doing. And I should figure out how to do this and auditioned for NYU, which was one of the best schools and still is one of the best schools to train, and got in. And lucky for me, my parents were willing to pay for another university thing. And so, yeah, pulled into it and really loved it and still love it. Love the process of telling stories and watching stories. And that eventually, after I graduated from NYU, led to me feeling still incomplete in my training. And I heard about Bill Esper, and we started from scratch, did a 2-year training program with him after graduating from conservatory. And that really settled me and set me up to really understand the craft of acting in the fullest way. And then that led to directing after a while, which I realized I like to be in charge. I always had opinions when I was an actor about other people's costumes and other people's acting, but of course it's a no-no for an actor to tell another actor how they feel about that stuff. And so when I became a director, I was like, oh, I get to be in charge, and then started to teach at first just to support my directing, because directors, at least in America, on stage directors who don't do musicals that last for 20 years, like Wicked, don't make much money. And so you usually have to have another job. And sometimes that's TV, and sometimes that's working at a theater, and sometimes that's teaching. And so the teaching started just to support the directing, but then, it became what I loved, and ultimately decided to start my own studio. And around the time I was teaching, some actors were starting to come to me and say, hey, man, can you help me with this part? And that's how the coaching aspect of my work, which is sort of side by side with my teaching, started. Yeah.
Amazing.
That's the short version. Yeah.
No, I love it. I love it. It's good because there's a lot I can unpack there. I'd like to go back to, because a lot of people of our listeners are international listeners. Tell me why NYU is like a great institution to train at and study. And you said still to this day it is, correct? And so
Yes.
what about NYU is great for actors?
Right. Well, I think the best actors come from the theater and return to the theater. Even great film actors like Denzel Washington or Meryl Streep, you see them keep coming back to the theater. And to me, the theater in America is Broadway. It's not. It's also Chicago, and there are other places where wonderful regional theater happens, beautiful regional theater. But to be able to partake on a daily basis, to watch theater, to go to Broadway, to go to off-Broadway, to go to off-Broadway, and see theater all the time and be in that world is really important. So I think partly NYU is a great place to train because it's in New York. And because the teachers, most of the faculty are working actors, not all of them, that's where they want to be, right? And so you have, as opposed to, I'll just make it up, a good training program in Wisconsin. But who are those teachers, and what are they doing, and what can the students soak up besides what's happening on campus, which is, I think, limiting.
Yeah.
To be able to go and be 5 feet away from Denzel Washington doing An Iceman Cometh is a spectacular opportunity to grow and to learn and to absorb the vibration, or Viola Davis or whoever, right? Is a very rich opportunity. So they've got a great faculty, they've got a great location, and because of that reputation, it is the plum job for a teacher. And so anyone who wants to teach acting in New York probably wants to teach it at NYU first, and then Juilliard, right, is a great competition. Maybe Columbia. Yale is 2 hours away. But it's this mecca for great training. So that's a big part of it, is that I had great teachers, and of course they attract great students. So your sparring partners, it's like being in, the NBA finals, you've got great players to play with, and that always makes a difference. So it's very hard to get into. And so when you get into it, you're going to be surrounded, or have the potential to be surrounded, by the really elite people, at the top of their game, or with the potential to get there, and being inspired by exciting teachers who want to do that in a place where it's just all around you.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And nobody's explained that to me in that way, but it is.
And I'll say one other thing, because I heard you speaking to a woman, and I was just doing a little homework, and you were asking her questions about LA. And I've taught in LA. Like doing workshops. I'll go out there for a week. I'm planning to do one this coming March. First one I've done since the pandemic. I actually was scheduled to do one in the April of 2020, and we had to cancel. But what I notice is that the actors I work with, so I go out there for a week and we do what we call a master class, where actors are bringing in theatrical scenes. I work with them intensely, like 8 hours a day for like a week. Talented people, right? With resumes. They all have They all have agents. They all have managers. They all have credits.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something about the energy with which they approach the work that to me feels less gritty and engaged than what I notice in New York. There's
That's
something a
really
little more
interesting.
relaxed, a little bit more on the back foot. I have a very banal theory about that, which is that it's such a nice lifestyle there. You can drive to the beach, you can get great, fruits and vegetables and tacos and stuff like that, and you're in your car all the time. That kind of New York thing of being on the subway and going to theater and being in the energy of it all, it's just different. And it's
Like
not to say you can't
street
be.
like.
It's different, right? And it's not that they're not great actors in LA, but I'll notice that when an agent in LA wants to send me a student, the training is better in New York overall. They're great coaches in LA. Like
Mm.
once you know how to act, it's a great place to locate yourself. But if you want the training, which is like boot camp, I think New York has a little bit of an edge. Of course, I'd get a lot of argument and probably some haters for saying that, but that's been my experience, that I have to kind of invite those actors at the master class to like, let's go, let's go, let's go, and they come along because they're good
Mm.
people. And it's a real sweeping generalization, but that's another piece of it, I think.
A nuance. When you move from acting to directing, what was that transition like? Because it's
Scary.
actually quite a big step.
Yeah.
And how did you take that on board?
Well, it was an accident, of course, if you believe in those things. My wife at the time, I now have, we were together for a while, but I now have another wife and some kids with her, and that's wonderful. But my wife at the time was a wonderful playwright and had written a play that had some success and was going to get another production, a kind of higher level production, and was supposed to be directed by a wonderful colleague of ours, Anne Bogart. And she's an extraordinary director. And then Anne got another opportunity, I think in Santa Fe, directing an opera. And so all of a sudden, my ex-wife needed a director, and she said, "How about you?" And I was like, "Okay, I'll try." So it was really just a lark at the time. Um, but I'd been in enough theater productions to understand what happens in a theater, and I certainly had a sense of what makes good acting. I had to deal with some other things like lights and costumes and sound and sets and all that kind of stuff, which was also fun. Um, so I thought it was just going to be like a one-off, except as I say, I kind of fell in love with it, and it's like, oh, I really like this even more. Um, and so then I started to pursue directing opportunities in small theaters wherever I could, just putting my name out there and getting some jobs and figuring it out, figuring out the puzzle of a play and how to turn those words on the page and find the right actors, which is so much of the key. If you cast the right people, it's everything. And if you don't, it's a lot of work and it could just tank the production. And that would be on you, the director. And then I applied for this award that they give, a grant for emerging directors, uh, by the Drama League of New York, and was fortunate enough to get that. And so they supported me for about 9 months, assisting some very high level theater directors in New York and down in Washington, D.C., and paying for a professional production of a thing I did in New York that sort of artistic directors came to shop for new directing talent. And so that kind of took me to the next level. And so, as I said, it was scary but exciting and a real learning process because there's a lot that goes into stuff like that. And I made a lot of mistakes
Mm.
along the way, for sure.
Well, that's the way you learn, right?
Yeah, yeah, you try by fire. Yeah, I had this one production. I was assisting the artistic director of a theater that's no longer in existence at the 92nd Street Y in New York, which is a very famous arts place on the Upper East Side. And it was a play called Rosenfeld's War, which was written by this Louisiana playwright, Jewish playwright, about Franklin Delano Roosevelt, President Roosevelt's response to the Nazi situation before World War II, like in the 30s and the early 40s, which was not so nice. And ultimately a ship called the St. Louis with Jewish refugees came from Nazi Germany to America, and we didn't let them disembark. And so they had to go back to Germany and probably perish. So it was a play about that story. It was all collected from real news sources, like people's testimony, what people wrote stories about it. It was all real stuff. There was nothing fictional in it. There was like 80 characters played by 10 actors. And I was his assistant. And so it was a very different kind of play than like a Tennessee Williams play or something like that.
Right.
It wasn't really a realistic play. So I was there. He had auditions. He cast the 10 actors. And then 3 days before the first rehearsal, he called me and said, the board of directors of the theater says that if I don't put all my attention into the upcoming season and talk to them and strategize, we're going to lose the theater. I can't direct the play. You need to do it.
Wow.
So all of a sudden, it was like the understudy to Hamlet, like going into the show. So I went, okay, let's do it. And I proceeded to start to rehearse. And in New York, rehearsals are about 3 to 4 weeks for a play. And then you open, compared to like the 2 years that Stanislavski spent on the first production of Chekhov's The Seagull. So we're doing it. I'm staging everything. I'm putting it together. I'm doing all my stuff. And then he and the dramaturg and the writer came and watched like a run through, just sort of a scaffolding of what we were going to do in a rehearsal hall. The cast did it. He came to me with the dramaturg and said, you're ruining the play. Your approach to this is like it's a realistic play. This is an imagistic play, and it depends on metaphor and abstraction and movement. And your approach is killing it.
Wow.
Right? And so here's what you need to do. And like the cast was on lunch, and I felt like I was getting, a terminal diagnosis, and yet told, okay, now's the time to save your life. He didn't fire me. He didn't fire me. He said, fix it. And so I had to go back to the cast and say, guys, we're starting out again. I don't know what we're going to do. We got to figure this out. I have some ideas. It's not in my wheelhouse, but we're going to figure it out together. And we had to redo from scratch that play. And I brought in some choreographers and helped me get there. And we got a performance out of it. But man, I mean, just telling you about that, and I feel like I was kicked in the stomach, and
wow.
And it's reminding me, and that's, you learn by making mistakes, but man, that was a heavy one. That was a heavy one. I had several of those because they're directorial things that you don't think about as an actor. The first time I directed on a thrust stage, I was used to proscenium stages, like a Broadway stage. And a thrust stage is like the stage comes out into the audience and there are audience on both sides. And the producer came up to me again, right after a run through. I was doing Arthur Miller's All My Sons up in upstate New York. And the great Robert Moss, who founded Playwrights Horizons here, which is one of the famous off-Broadway theaters, was the producer. And he said, you're killing the play. He said, you don't know how to direct on a thrust stage, do you? And I said, I don't think so. I'm just directing. He said, yeah, it doesn't work. Thrust stage is all about diagonals. So while they're at lunch, I'm going to give you a crash course, a dummy's guide to thrust stage directing. And I had to restage all that stuff. So trial by fire, that was cool. I mean, I don't feel as kicked in the stomach telling that story, but I made a lot of mistakes on the way. And that's part of it. Yeah.
But that gives you all of the tools to be able to now teach, I guess. That's, all that experience wrapped up in from acting to directing, now to pass that on to students, correct?
A little bit, but actors who are cast in plays aren't there to learn how to act, even though some of them don't know how to act. And so then you have to figure out a way to package that, those acting lessons, if you need to give them, in ways that don't affront their dignity. Whereas people who come to school they're bought into the idea that they're there to learn. So there's a little bit more possibility, and there's a lot of resistance. You know, people who come into education are saying they want to change. And then we as human beings have an evolutionary resistance to change because change is scary. So people say they want to change, but then they don't change. And that becomes, you always meet resistance, you know, no matter how cooperative, how bought in they are. But some people are more like, you know, I've got a lot of people in a class I just started in this 2-year program who are conflict avoiders, which was a strategy that they developed in life because it wasn't safe to speak up. So the defense makes sense, and everyone has defenses. We all need defenses to live in the world. But the idea of acting is that you kind of have to have none of those, that you have to be naked and free and willing to risk everything because there's no consequences in acting, right? If you get killed, you don't really die, right? If you speak up for your mother, he's not going to kick you out of the family.
Right.
And so a lot of acting training is not only learning skills, but also unlearning. And some people are more willing and some people aren't. And then you have to kind of see if you can crack that code. And ultimately, you hope they come along and that they put more energy into taking a risk rather than defying you. Because then why are you there? Why are they there? Like, if you want me to help you, okay, this is hard. By the way, you're going to get it wrong most of the time. Okay, so you can't be a perfectionist. And are you willing to let us see you and let us see you not so together?
When I worked with Franco Dragone, we were working with acrobats and gymnasts. And one of the most amazing things to see Franco Dragone do is undo an acrobat and a gymnast to introduce what a character might be for one of those people. And watching that process was really fascinating because it took a long time. And like, I like your analogy of like undoing stuff, because it was to let go of all of their concept of what performance was in a gymnastic sense and reinvent that for the stage. And that was really fascinating to see.
Yeah, because the soul isn't necessarily called upon for gymnastics, although obviously it's possible to have it there because you have to be safe and you have to do something that's very physically precise. And I find that with ballet dancers as well. And I even find it with people who do a lot of musical theater. There's such an emphasis on presentation that kind of leaves behind the messy core that's inside. There's something that's got to be just perfect and land it and stick it and also make sure you're safe. Because if you're grabbing someone who's doing a tumble, you have to make sure that they are safe. And so the willingness to fall and be messy and let us see you, let us see your imperfect inner life is challenging for people who are so used to having it right and have been coached into that. It's a different set of values. So I'm imagining maybe what you saw with that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think to be an actor is such a vulnerable job generally, right? It's just something that you've really got
that word is so interesting, vulnerable, because like Brené Brown talks about the power of vulnerability. But if we think about how people use that word usually, like in politics or let's say global relations, we might say that a weaker country is vulnerable to attack, which means in danger of being harmed. And I actually don't think you're in danger of being harmed as an actor. There is no inherent danger. The mutual agreement that actors make with each other is mutual non-harm, no matter what happens. If we're in a scene and I feel murderously enraged with you, I'm going to keep you safe so we can come back and play tomorrow. So that word vulnerability, I understand it and people use it a lot. And to me, I prefer the word open and available. That I'm here and I'm available and I'm letting you see me and I'm sharing my full self with you in the most intimate way, and no harm is going to happen to you or to me, right? No one's going to be harmed by this in any consequential way. I might get upset. I might get scared. I might hate you. I might be humiliated, but that's a great day in acting.
Mm.
What a great day. I had this full experience.
I love that. I love that.
So I think it's cool. Really, it's a gift to have all those. I mean, otherwise life is rather boring.
Yeah.
I think as you were describing the differences between dancers, acrobats, and actors, in my head, it all comes back to trust. And I think it's where you're talking about vulnerability, there's a strong connection to trust. An actor trusts that both technicians and peers are not going to let them, they literally trust us with their lives, yeah? And I think an actor is trusting us with everything that it's inside them, as you were saying, a little bit with their soul, to be able to express it. And maybe it's portrayed differently when they're on stage, but at the end, it's this deep sense of trust to the people, or on the people that you're working with.
Yes, that's true. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's a beautiful process, I think. I would like you to, because your training is, your teaching is the foundation is the Meisner technique, and many people who don't live in the acting world, who might be our listeners, can you sort of explain particularly what the Meisner tech is and how that applies in your teaching?
Sure. Man, I'm going to struggle to be succinct, but I'll do my best. First of all,
and now a note from our sponsor. The Theatre Art Life podcast is proud to be sponsored by ClearCom. ClearCom is the leader in voice communications for theatre and the performing arts. Call your cues with the simplicity and elegance of ClearCom Intercom solutions. You can find them at clearcom.com. Go check them out.
At the end of the day, nobody cares what the way you learned how to act. Nobody says, hey, I want to go to some Meisner acting tonight. Can we watch a movie with some Meisner actors? Nobody says that. Right? So at the end of the day, it's just a road to hopefully the same place all good training leads to, which is that you're a skillful actor who knows how to turn stories into behavior that's truthful and compelling and serves the story and also serves you as an artist. Right? So Meisner technique is no better or worse, inherently than any other approach, except for me, it's the best way for a couple of reasons. And they all lead back to Stanislavski. Like Stanislavski was the turning point, the marker for all Western acting, right? Mm-hmm. Before that, American acting and European acting, if we look at like Sarah Bernhardt at the turn of the century, was very presentational, like you see in old silent movies, right? Oh, no, stop, right? It was all very melodramatic and not real. Mm-hmm. And then Stanislavski came to New York with the Moscow Art Theater with that first production of The Seagull and blew people's minds because people saw stuff that was real and living in front of them, right? So it's all tied to him. But of course, his career evolved. Meisner was part of that scene, the scene called the Group Theater in New York that included Lee Strasberg, who people have probably heard about. That was Al Pacino's teacher. Stella Adler, Marlon Brando's teacher. Clifford Odets, a wonderful playwright. And they were all part of this collective of many other people. Cheryl Crawford was in there, who were dedicated to making great theater in New York. And then all of a sudden, Stanislavski showed up. Meisner was also a pianist. And there's something about the way dance and music, musical instrument training is taught that's very different from actor training. When I went to NYU, the thing I did the very first day at NYU, one of the greatest places to train in the world, was scene study. We started with Streetcar Named Desire. And I was there like, well, okay, this is NYU. I didn't go, that's weird. And of course, you can do that. And many schools start with that and learn how to do that scene. Just like you can go on YouTube and learn how to do the solo from Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven, but that doesn't make you a guitar player. Now, I didn't know that. I didn't know that there was something backwards about that approach, because a musician would start with scales and arpeggios. A dancer, a ballet dancer, would start with first position, second position, plie, right? You don't start with Swan Lake and you don't start with Beethoven. So when I got out of NYU, I found my work to be hit or miss. Sometimes my work worked and sometimes my work didn't work. And I found that really frightening. You know, I'd hate to be a dentist who like some days knows what to do and other days doesn't know what to do. Or, you know, that I don't want to see that dentist. And you know what? I knew a lot of other actors who could say the same thing. Hey, man, sometimes I'm in the pocket, sometimes I'm in the flow, and sometimes I'm lost. And around that time, I discovered the Meisner technique. So one of the things about the Meisner technique is that Sandy Meisner brought his understanding of the pedagogical aspects of musical training, because he was a great pianist, to actor training. It was trying to find, what can I do that's like a scale? What can I do that's like an arpeggio? What can I do that's very basic, that through accumulation of small pieces of knowledge that get more and more complex but have this foundation under them, ultimately lead to the ability to be able to take on any role. So it's a 2-year program that has that quality in it. That's number one. That's primary. The second thing is it puts a great emphasis on improvisation and listening. So, for instance, the method, which is Lee Strasberg's approach, is very sort of self-oriented, right? I'm not with you right now because I'm generating inner life based on memories and experience, or I'm trying to create a world to be in. So it's a very rich behavior that comes out, but not so much contact and improvisation with whoever they're working with often, right? So Meisner starts with, you put your attention on the other person. You don't think about yourself. It's like starting juggling with 1 ball and then 2 balls and then 3 balls. And at the end, you got a zillion balls up in the air. But I like that sort of step-by-step approach. And the third and final thing about it that I love, and it's very keyed into Stella Adler's approach as well, and Meisner and Stella Adler were contemporaries and friends, is that it very much is based on the imagination rather than on personal history. Now, at the end of the day, again, it doesn't matter. You can't say, well, Al Pacino's work is less good than someone else because he was a method actor, right? Some of his work is gorgeous, right? But I find that healthier, especially dealing with stuff like trauma, right? So that I don't have to go in and dig into stuff that maybe I should be better off working with a therapist on, because I can just make it up. Right? Plus, what if I don't have the experience that the script calls for? If the script calls for me to, I don't know, have been beaten up by my parents a lot, and my parents were very loving, I don't have any history to draw from. But boy, if I work on the imagination, I can go, well, what if? What if my father was actually really rough and abusive? And what if he hit me and he hit my mother? And and I start to place myself in that imagination, which matches beautifully what writing for the theater is about. A playwright's going, well, what if? Shakespeare was going, what if 2 14-year-olds from families who hate each other met at a party and fell in love? Right? That's not about history. That's about fantasy. So that's a kind of a very loose thing, and it's very systematic, and it involves a lot of practice, and it's a 2-year program. It's not like a little workshop. And the first year is about you, with no emphasis on character, really getting in touch with all kinds of parts of yourself, and also learning how to improvise and getting certain skills like emotional preparation, stuff like that, and learning how to craft, which means what the thing that actors do to arrange for behavior. How do I do something that on the homework side leads to, when they say action, the behavior I want, whatever that is, right? And then the second year is all about character work and good scripts and learning how to interpret those and really go step by step by step to create a very clear, repeatable score of meanings and actions and relationships to serve the play, and also you as an artist. So it's very comprehensive and very complete, and very practical, but also somewhat spiritual and rich, and you grow as a human being as you learn how to do this.
Do you get any students that are not particularly just want to go through the process, that want to be exposed to that aren't necessarily aspiring to be actors? Because it kind of sounds like a great human exploration as well, right?
It is, but sure. It ends up being therapeutic, but it's not therapy. And I encourage all my students to go to therapy, because the more you know about yourself, the more you can bring to the work. So, and Stella Adler said that any good artistic training has the necessary byproduct outcome of you becoming a better person. Like if you really, really train in anything, Japanese flower arranging, you're going to learn something about yourself that ultimately makes you a richer, better citizen of the world, and I think ultimately a happier person. But I don't think I'd want to take on someone for this who said, look, I have no interest in acting, but it just sounds like a great way for me to grow. Because they would grow, but I'd be treating them as an actor, and the frame, they would always be a bit of an imposter in that. Although many people have gone through it and then decided after going through it, not right away, that actually their path leads them somewhere else, and they never have regrets for having done this. And I delight in writing recommendation letters for them to law school and social work school and whatever else they're going to do. And this was just part of their journey.
I love this idea that being a good artist will make you inherently a good person. I don't know if it applies to everyone, but I like this idea.
I'd like to think so, and it makes me feel good about myself. But I also see it. I see it because you become more self-aware and more, art heals the world, because art reports the world back to the world, and people don't go to the theater to see you; they go to see themselves. And nothing is more affirming when you see a story and you go, I recognize myself in that story. I see myself in that story. Somebody understands my experience, and that, what a great thing. The feeling of being understood and it makes you feel less alone. So to be an artist is to really be a healer, in my opinion, And when 9/11 happened, I was in New York at the time. I was teaching at NYU. Can you imagine? I mean, the 11th of September, all these kids had arrived from, these 18-year-olds had arrived to New York to go to college, and then the world changed and stopped, and
Wow.
there was rubble and dust all over the place. So obviously there was a healing process. It was a crazy place to be at the time. It was just stunning. And the writer E.L. Doctorow, who taught at NYU, who wrote the book Ragtime, which also became a Broadway show, gave a talk like 5 days after 9/11 and said that artists have always been rescue workers. My girlfriend at the time was a nurse who was down at Ground Zero volunteering, helping people. And he said artists are also rescue workers. And then you saw that with Hurricane Katrina here. And we go into communities and we are doing things to repair and restitch the world. I believe. I mean, maybe that sounds highfalutin, but to me, what we do, art is not optional. It's something that in the American school systems are often seen, especially in public schools, as optional and superfluous, but it's actually essential to me. And I don't think what we're doing is silly. I think it's necessary and important and soul healing and rich. And not just acting, like painting and sculpture and dance and music and all of it, poetry.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think it's so essential. We just have to keep making sure it stays in it stays in those systems so that can experience it. It's really important. Well, we've got just a few more questions because we're wrapping up
Sure.
our times. We always finish our podcast with the same question. So, what's your most favorite thing about your job or the industry?
The industry is a whole other story because it's not as pure in a way. I mean, I love it in the industry when really great, talented people can come together in a perfect storm to make a wonderful project. That doesn't always happen. But when it does, it's special. And so I don't think the industry is designed for that. Netflix's point of view is not about making art. It's about delivering value to their shareholders. So their mission is not necessarily about finding great projects, except to the extent that it raises their bottom line. So the industry is something separate. My job, luckily, doesn't depend on that. So what I love, my first child, my son, was born at home in a home birth with a midwife. My daughter, we had in a hospital, and I sometimes feel like a midwife, helping. I love, oh my God, I just love watching actors figure this stuff out and go from A to B in my classes. So to see someone who's been struggling for a while, who hasn't been getting it, who's been lost, who hasn't been able to figure out, but they stick with it. And then one day something starts to happen, and they did it. I didn't do it. They did it. But it's so lovely to watch that, to witness that. It's such a privilege. And to have some small part in the facilitation of that birthing of themselves and their talent. I mean, it's delicious and special and moving to everyone. And I love doing it in a group process. I love being able to turn the class and say, I think today in class, this wonderful girl named Deja, who's a little contained, like full of life, but it's all balled up. And it opened up a little bit today. And we've only been doing it for 6 classes out of the 128 over 2 years. So we're just at the beginning of the journey. And I said, I think she's opening up a little bit. And the class was, and how invested a class gets in each other's progress and journey. Even if you don't love everybody in class and you wouldn't necessarily be their friend, you kind of want them to get there. So that's lovely. And then the other part of my work when I'm coaching, it's lovely to work with actors who we find the flow and the material's great, and to collaborate together, because there's no rehearsal in film and television. And most of the projects I'm working on, not all of them, are for film and TV with people who play leading roles, like some of those names you named at the beginning of the podcast. And I mean, one of my absolute favorites is Sam Rockwell, who I met when he was a student at the Esper Studio. And we've been working together for 30 years, and he was the best man at my wedding. And, we have this great flow, and we're working on like 3 projects now, all of which are SAG waiver projects. No one's crossing a picket line or anything like that. But he calls it, when we get together, that we're in the moment factory, because it's not always on the page. And to be able to work and to make stuff, and like that's what kids are doing with sandcastles, and to be able to be children and play together and go, what if, and see that Sam, the script, the story, and me are kind of making something so that he shows up loaded, ready to go, because there ain't no rehearsal. And when that happens with a great script, with a great actor, that's really, I just got a notification. He just sent me a text. That's fun.
Yeah.
And that's fun when we can do that. And it's just about being creative. So it's a different function. Yeah.
If you could change anything about your job or the industry, what would it be?
Well, I wouldn't change anything about my job, I don't think. I just like, a lot fewer people are training nowadays than they did when I trained.
Really?
So across the board, some schools have closed, ours didn't. The pandemic was very challenging, but even before, the trend was trending downward, because you can have a successful Netflix career based on followers. Netflix will hire actors who have 150,000 followers because, again, they just want eyeballs. So if success to you as an actor is working, then you don't really care about what you're making. You're not leaving a legacy behind. You're just saying, hey, I'm working as an actor. I get my paycheck as an actor as opposed to as a barista. Success. Sad to me, but and people are wanting a quick fix. And so they say, well, can you teach me how to act in a weekend? or in a month or something like that. Well, you tell that to a ballet dancer or a concert violinist, right?
Mm,
So the appreciation of quality and the reward and the greed of the industry to just keep making content, and not care if it's good or not is sad, sometimes enraging, and very discouraging to me. So what I would want to change is to have more people want to leave behind a body of work that they love and that they care about and that can touch people. And so they can say at the end of their life, hey, because I did this, the world was a little bit better, right? As opposed to, hey, I worked, or hey, I won
mm,
an award. But that would also involve the industry being less greedy, because an
mm,
agent often will ride an actor like a pony. And if an actor says, hey, I think I need some training, they go, no, you don't need training. That takes you off the market. It's pilot season. Why? Because they want the 10%, and they don't have the long view that, hey, if I let this actor go for 2 years to train, yes, it's true, I won't be getting the 10% of whatever they'd make as a co-star on Law and Order for a week of work in a forgettable part. But
mm,
that's money, because they'll make $5,000. I make 10%, 500. Bingo, right? Let me let them go. Let me let them invest in their talent. And then we'll be together for another 20 or 30 years, and they'll be at the next level. And so they'll discourage those actors, and the actors will be driven by fear. Oh, I got to stay in the marketplace. What if there's a project? Instead of, wait, what do I want to do? Right? So to me, they're kind of connected. That's what I'd love to change, is valuing aspiration and quality rather than being driven by fear and needing that next paycheck.
mm. I hope that that's just a cycle and we can cycle our way out of that.
I hope so. I hope so. I hope so. I'm
Yeah.
not always so hopeful about that, because this is, some people call the youth generation right now, whoever they are in their 20s, as the loneliest generation. And partly that's fueled by social media and the isolation. I mean, my son gets to, I have a 10-year-old and a 2-year-old. My son gets together with his friends. He's very social, but they literally sit on our couch and they all are looking at their iPads because they're playing a game together, and they could touch each other, you
Mm.
know? And so there's a loneliness right now there that I think fuels and speaks against the intimacy that live touch and performance and telling stories with another person does for us.
Mm. Yeah. And that's a big, we could do another whole podcast on that, I think.
Yeah.
Terry, if you could nominate another podcast guest for us, who's in your orbit that you think is a fascinating person for us to talk to?
Gee, I gotta think.
Could even be a student.
Well, I really like this guy, Parker Palmer. He's, do you know him?
No.
Parker Palmer, he has a podcast. He's a Quaker and a humanist, and he's written a book about the heart of teaching. He has an institute. And I just am so soothed when I hear him speak, and he has such a gentle, related presence. So I like to take my dog for a walk in the morning and listen to him talk sometimes. And he's the first person that came to my mind. I like
Perfect.
him.
We
And
will look him up.
I think, obviously, I think any good actor who's worked here, Mark Ruffalo, I don't know if you
Hmm.
could get him, but man, he's a citizen of the world and a deep human being and a great actor. I love his work. Yeah,
Hmm.
those people come to
Awesome.
mind. Yeah,
Wonderful. Terry, it's been a pleasure today to spend time with you and talk to you about
thank
your work
you.
and your philosophies on the industry. I really like your vision and much respect for what you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm a dinosaur when it comes to that, but I'm going to stick to my story. And it's so nice to meet both of you, and thank you for spending time with me in such a resonant way. Yeah,
Thank you for sharing with us.
of course. My pleasure.
Theater at Life is a global media site for entertainment. Memberships start at only $38 per year. You can have unlimited access to our daily published articles, including entertainment news and the writings of active industry professionals, ensuring that you are always up to date on the global happenings in the world of entertainment. Become a part of the international entertainment community and join us now at www.theaterartlife.com.